So this is my Native American history video blog. The project said be creative and personal, and what's more personal than my childhood bedroom? And I hope you make it all the way through the video. I hope you like what I did, because I spent a lot of time on it, and I hope it all makes sense. I'm making this introduction and I've already finished the video, but it probably took about 8 hours for only 12 and a half minutes of video. So enjoy, and I'll see you at the end. The first thing I want to talk about would probably be, this whole issue we keep bringing up about Native Americans telling the Native American history as if that's somehow better than white historians telling Native American history. I don't really understand that completely. I don't know my history better than an Asian person might know history. And so you have to study something to know about it. Just because you're Native American doesn't mean you know more. Maybe you have Native American stories and you can pass those on to a historian and that'll help them put it together in history and make it make sense. But I mean, the culture is probably different now. I'm pretty sure that Native American culture now is probably in no way like what it was then. Maybe someone thinks it's bad, oh, we lost a culture. But culture changes all the time. And I like to think of it as the language of Latin, because no one speaks Latin anymore, but people study Latin. And it died out as a language where it's no longer like a conversational language, and that's because they wouldn't let it change. They were trying so hard to keep it exactly what it was and to make sure it wasn't changing that it died out. And yeah, maybe we wouldn't know Latin anymore if no one had tried to preserve it, but we still know English, and that's changed a lot. But between Beowulf and now, you can still interpret Beowulf. You can figure it out. Beowulf still enriches our culture. It still is taught, and we can still understand parts of our culture from it. And it really enriches us, and it's still literature to us. And I think Native American culture is changing, and instead of being so focused on preserving it, we need to let it be whatever it's going to be. And it's probably going to merge with ours, and maybe we're going to lose a lot. But it's okay. Cultures change, and they're always adapting, and they're always changing. And just because something's good now doesn't mean you have to try so hard to preserve it. You can let it change and adapt and become something new. I guess my whole point is from the whole Indian voice and Indian history and incorporating the Indian voice. I don't think the way to incorporate an Indian voice is to ask Native Americans now, because the Native Americans alive today aren't the same ones that had all the bad things happen. They're descendants, and while it affects their lives now, it's not the same. Like, they weren't hurt personally. It's just part of their history. I mean, there have been a lot of cultures that died out, and all we can learn from them is buried, and you have to dig and you have to make inferences, and it's really hard, and you don't actually know. And the Native Americans are a little bit unique because we have all of this buried history and buried culture that we have to dig through and figure out. But then there are living Native Americans that we think we can get oral traditions from. But we can't rely on Native Americans and pass down stories for all of our historical facts of the Indians in the 1600s. We also talked about, the articles we read talked about the interpretation by the reader, and maybe someone would say Indian or Native American history should be taught through an oral tradition or in a way that a Native American would tell it, but it also has to do with the reader and the learner. I think it's easier if history and information comes in a voice that we know and we can understand. And I'm going to stop that right there and talk about something else. As for the blame for historians for not teaching Indian history correctly, I mean, in the Richter article, it talks about how both whites and Indians have been lied to, and there's some kind of government involvement that's keeping people from knowing things. And I'm not saying there's like a conspiracy theory or anything to hide Native American history, but I do think it's kind of true about the government hiding some things, and I think they had a big part in education, and they were what blocked that being taught like that in history classes. Just like the Civil War is taught different in the South than it is in the North, I think Native American history is just going to be taught different to different people. And I think it's really good that we're finally learning more about it and more honest things. And it's good to objectively learn about and not place real blame on any group of people that's alive today, because it's all about groups of people that were alive in the past. I don't really blame historians. I mean, I think they weren't trying necessarily to hide anything. They just didn't really know any better. I don't think ethnocentrism was really starting to be abolished until, like, Spencer is a sociologist. And it's a hard thing to come about naturally, to not be ethnocentric, and it's something you think about and you have to get over and stuff like that. So I don't blame those historians. I think as long as the people today are doing the best they can to teach people the truth and honest history, that it's not really anyone to blame. There was that line, the winners write the history, and it's kind of true, but that doesn't mean we can't go back and rewrite it and figure out what the truth is. So I think that's what we need to do, and maybe we didn't realize that before, but now we do. So no blame for anyone. Earlier I referenced a sociologist, Herbert Spencer, but that was actually an accident because I didn't mean Herbert Spencer. I actually meant to say Franz Boas. Of course, I'm a sociology major, so I'm bringing sociology into this, and I think it was actually a big milestone during that time. In the 1800s, probably the later 1800s, he was doing his research. He was a sociologist and an anthropologist, and he did a lot of work changing the field. He had like a big milestone in sociology. Before him, sociologists such as Spencer believed in social evolution, that one culture was lower than another superior culture, and eventually you would evolve to be better, but those who were lower were just not as good as the other ones. And I think that's a huge ethnocentric view that probably really hurt Native American history. And so I think around that, these people who were studying cultures and were really the ones recording things, when Franz Boas really came out with his research about cultures not being in a hierarchy or ranking, about them actually being like, you have to look at them in their own social settings, I think that really brought new respect for other cultures. And I think that really changed a lot of the way we view other cultures, and that probably helped the history of the Native Americans. And so I just think that's a big milestone, because I'm a sociology major. The other milestone, or one I can think of, is the civil rights movement. And even though it was mostly African Americans fighting for their equality, I think it really helped other ethnicities too, to help stand up and stand out against white supremacy. And even though it's not centrally directed towards Native Americans, I do think it helped a little bit with that. As for stumbling blocks, I think that just a lot of guilt might have played a factor in not really wanting to admit what we had done, but also not knowing kind of got in the way of us really researching Native American history. Also, the fact that so much of the culture is destroyed, and as I went on and on about earlier, the culture is different now than it was then, and it's a very natural evolution, and of course the culture is different. And it's really hard because they didn't write down history the same way that we did. I know the Aztecs had a written language, so we can learn about that Native American history. If we've actually deciphered that, I'm not sure if we can translate that yet, but that would be a good way to learn about that history. But other than that, they didn't really have a lot of written down histories, so we don't really know. And we have to use anthropology and we have to use archaeology the same way we do with other cultures, like the mound cultures in England. And while we still have their oral traditions and oral history, I think you really need to take those with a grain of salt, because they can change when they get passed on. They're not exact word-to-word recitings, and I think we just need to be careful about how much we take those for fact and how much we take them as part of the culture and something that is useful to understanding the culture as it was and as it is. It might be a cultural phenomenon, but not really completely historically accurate, so we need to be careful with them. I think a lot of history was lost with the Native Americans. The tragedy that so many died, and I wish that that hadn't happened, but it did. And so we just need to move on from that and study the history of it through the remains and artifacts that they left behind. I guess you can call those stumbling blocks because it's hard, but I think eventually we can put together a lot of pieces of the puzzle. And that was my video blog that I spent a really long time working on. I am probably going to attach like a written summary of everything I just said so you can go through some of the key points. And I'm also hopefully going to put in 2 little YouTube videos of comics I think are funny, because I really think they emphasize the detach between Native American culture then and Native American culture now, and like how people view it. And so I hope you liked it, and Merry Christmas!